I will now hand things off to my colleague and friend, Martin Redcorn, to get the conversation started. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Lashmi. Merci et bienvenue. Welcome, everyone, to our 22nd Democracy Forum at TMU. But as Dr. Lashmi said, it's our first ever hybrid event. And it's an experiment with a hybrid format. So thank you for coming in person. It's good to be back here after 2 years of Zoom. But also a warm welcome to anyone watching online, on TV, with the CPAC channel, or on the star.com. A warm welcome to you. So let me tell you about our special guests who will talk to us today about their firsthand experiences in helping to defend democracy against the rise of autocracy, militarism, on the front lines of Europe and around the world. First, a programming note, one of a few, in fact, today. The Foreign Minister of Estonia, Eva-Maria Liimets, can no longer join us today because she is no longer the Foreign Minister. Her party was dismissed. Don't worry, this is normal. Her party was dismissed from the governing coalition of Estonia last night, and she is heading home as we speak. That's democracy, and the show must go on. Now, beside me is the Honorable Mélanie Joly, who is Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's been our country's point person on Ukraine since the last federal election. Her previous assignments were in economic development, tourism, Canadian heritage, and official languages. Hence my special attention to pronunciation today, but I forgot to check before we came on stage. I will tell you, she is the MP or député from Ahuntsic-Cartierville.
Great.
Depuis 2015, 2015.
Great Mohawk and great French.
She earned her law degree at l'Université de Montréal and her master's in law at Oxford University. Merci d'avoir accepté notre invitation et bienvenue at Toronto Metropolitan University.
Merci, thank you.
Beside her is Gabrielis Landsbergis. He has been Lithuania's Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2020 and in its parliament since 2016 after first serving in the European Parliament. His early career was in the Foreign Ministry after getting a master's in international relations and diplomacy and a BA in history from Vilnius University. His grandfather led the cause of independence from the former Soviet Union in 1990. Welcome to Toronto. Second programming note, Latvia's Minister of Foreign Affairs had to bow out at the last minute for family reasons. We're honored to be joined today by the ministry's longtime parliamentary secretary, Zanda Kalniņa-Lukasevica, a role that she's held since 2014. She's also served in Latvia's parliament as chair of the European Affairs Committee and worked in the office of the president. She holds a PhD and master's in management science from the University of Latvia. Thank you for joining us. One more programming note. You will see a Foreign Service officer tap Madame Joly on the shoulder in a few minutes, or look her in the eye and catch her attention. She will have to leave us for 2 minutes or so to vote in a virtual parliamentary vote. That's democracy, and as I said, the show must go on, right? So you have to come back, though, all right?
Yeah, I'll come back. I'll make sure that to register my vote in the House of Commons.
And from my recollection of the parliamentary configuration, there was no chance of a coalition accident happening today.
My goal is to stay foreign minister for a long time.
Okay, I'm going to kick off the questions, and then, well, we've made news today. I'm going to kick off the questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor a little later. I always remind our audiences that this is not a news conference. I'm not here to beat them up. This is a democracy forum where we try to dig a little deeper, but we also hope that the people on stage, the politicians, will go a little more in depth in their answers. We have people on stage who are trained to be diplomatic, but we're hoping, given the gravity of the situation, they will be more candid than usual. No pressure. On a happier note, just briefly, I can't not acknowledge that this is the day after voting day in Ontario, and not everyone is celebrating the results, but no one is contesting the results, and that's a victory in itself these days. Okay, so these are gloomy days for democratic Ukraine and much of the world. We'll start by setting the table. We'll talk about how we got here, where we're at now, and what the outlook is for Ukraine and Europe and the world, Canada as well. We'll zoom out to some of the other superpowers and ask what it all means for democracy. And my first question to Madame Joly and then to everyone is, we could see this coming. Let's just set the table, as I said. Why didn't we move faster to prepare for it? We in Canada were reluctant to send lethal weapons, which now sounds quaint in the middle of a war. There may have been good reasons for it, so let's hear the answers, and then let's ask ourselves whether that made sense in retrospect. Were we afraid of provoking the Russians? And in retrospect, was that a miscalculation? I'm going to join you.
Thank you. Well, I think that Canada has had a principled approach when it comes to Ukraine since 2014. So, contrary to many countries, following the invasion by Russia of Crimea, already in 2014, we had strong sanctions against oligarchs and against the regime. So we had 400 sanctions in place by the time already the invasion started on February 24th. And also, we had already expelled diplomats from Canada, and therefore diplomats also in Canadian diplomats in Russia had been expelled. So now, fast forward in 2022, well, very quickly, when I became foreign minister, the first meeting we had was at NATO, actually in Latvia, in Riga. And eventually afterwards, the day after, we went to Sweden at the OSCE. And clearly that was the first diplomatic confrontation between Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and Blinken, the American Secretary of State. And we saw that not only there was no understanding clearly, but the narratives that the Russians were trying to push had started. Meanwhile, within the West, we had to make sure that we had the same understanding of what was going on. And there was a gap. There was an intelligence gap between Europe and between the Five Eyes in the US. And I would say even within Europe, the Baltic states were much more clear-eyed than some other European partners. So our goal, as the country that bridges a lot, the American reality and European reality, was to make sure that we could bridge that gap. And what happened also is it was very positive for the Americans to go ahead with this declassification of intelligence strategy, because it helped everybody to be on board, not only in Europe, but also within our democracies. And so I would say that we were at the forefront of being very much engaged and have had since the beginning, before the war and since the beginning of the war, one of the strongest response.
But if we were at the forefront, looking backwards now, were we too slow?
No, I don't think so. Our goal was really to make sure that some of the European states were saying we can't be provocative, others were saying no, but we have to be clear-eyed. And we were one of the first to go to Ukraine. I was in Ukraine even before Blinken, having conversations with Ukrainians. When I met with Zelensky in January, he was not talking to me about neither sanctions nor weapons. He was asking me to, and the government, to support financially his government, because he was much more concerned with economic instability than actually the war. And meanwhile, we were training Ukrainian soldiers. We had Operation Nearfire on site. We had, in Ukraine, we had trained 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and we were increasing also our investments in training. So, no, I don't think so. Hindsight is 2020. But I think we could have been, we were very strong in saying Russia is lying, and particularly Russia lied. But I think that this was a reckoning, particularly for Europe. And of course, my colleagues could comment on
Mr.
that.
Landsbergis, Madame Joly makes the point that Ukraine was conflicted. They were ambivalent in January and saying, well, don't destabilize, don't scare people too much. From where you sit in the Baltics, did everyone miss the signals that there was intelligence? Yes, but were people afraid of calling Russia's bluff? When you look at what happened now, was there a missed opportunity to prepare?
Well, first of all, I would say that there were several countries that were, as Madame Joly mentioned, already in Ukraine, assisting Ukraine. I will just speak for Lithuania. So the first donation of weapons from Lithuania to Ukraine left in December last year. There were not so many who were sending weapons. I think that there have been several miscalculations on many countries' part. We knew, the Five Eyes knew, the Baltics were convinced that the war will happen. But the main question was, how long can Ukrainians resist? The will to fight is very difficult to measure, and especially to predict, and even, you can have all the intelligence in the world, but you don't know that basically you would have 500,000 people who will take whatever arms they have and continue on fighting, even though the odds are against them. And when others started seeing that this is actually what is happening on the field, then countries started sending more and more weapons. So first of all, we had to build the trust with that Ukrainians are able to fight. Now, and I think that two things got Ukraine to where they are currently during the last 3 months. So first of all, it's will, and then weapons. Now the question remaining, probably one of the most important questions currently, is are we able to push even further? Because they definitely have the will, they showed the capacity, they're quick learners, they're super creative in how they use the weaponry that is being delivered to them. And it has to be mentioned. I know it's uncomfortable to say this, especially in some of the bigger industrial powers, for the industrial powers, that that the victory still depends on how many weapons and which kind of weapons will be sent. If we were to stop now, yes, the Ukrainians would have a very hard time to recovering territories that are under occupation currently. If we would step up with the deliveries, then they have a chance of winning and pushing Russians back.